Welcome everyone. In this video, we are going to talk about the simplest concept in statistics, or what we think is the simplest concept in statistics often. So the average, or the mean, and we are going to see that actually it might be one of the most tricky, and one where you can hide and use to hide many things, and that might be sometimes completely counterintuitive. I'm going to show examples where the mean is showing actually the opposite of the truth. And that's something that you have to be aware about, because then you can argue with someone, everybody's right, but just using a different average, we make up different stories. So let's see that together. And you have control So the very first thing is that we really have to understand what's the mean. The mean is the average of, so the sum over the sum of the values over the number of values. It means that, for example, if you look at the average effects, let's say in scientific research, I'm looking at the effect of weapons on war and how it increased the probability of war by sending more weapons. And I see that on average, it increased the probability of conflict, the intensity of the battles, the number of refugees. But the thing is that it's an average, meaning that maybe for all those countries, it affects positively, sending more weapons affects positively conflict. It increases conflict at different level, maybe sometimes a little, maybe sometimes a lot. But already here, it's very important to know the distribution, to know if all the estimates are relatively close, or if there is a very wide distribution. That's why often it's important to look at the mean, but to use as well what we call a confidence interval, between which boundaries are most of the values. And that's very important. Second, it might be even worse, because let's say I observe an average effect of that's positive of sending weapons on the probability of conflict. It increases this probability. But what if in some situation it decreases the probability, in other it increases? It's just the average. When you pull that together, you just see that on average it's positive, the effect. But for some countries, maybe it was a good thing to send weapons. And again, this will be hidden when you use just one metric, the average. So you have to look at the distribution and what's the distribution of potential values. And this is very, very important and very often completely forgotten. But let me tell you something. Might be actually even worse than that. Actually, maybe you compute the average and it reflects the opposite of the truth, of the reality. That seems completely insane, right? The mean is something very simple to compute. So let me take the following example that I've seen. I adapt that from a book that I've seen many years ago. So basically, let's say we see that in economics, for the master, 60% of female are failing their master, and only 40% of men are failing their master in economics. Meaning that if you look at the aggregate, at this average, basically the percentage where you put everything together, it's an average, you see that the proportion of female failing is higher than the proportion of men failing in economics. The trick is, or the thing that seems completely insane is actually, if you look, let's say for simplicity, you have two faculties in economics. You have finance and, I don't know, economics, political economy. And actually, if you look at the failure rates in finance and in political economy, women are doing better in both. And those two things can be true together because of what the mean is doing. You can have women better and with a lower failing rate in both subgroups, so in political economy and in finance, but when you aggregate together, actually women are doing worse, or it seems that they are doing worse. And this is what we call the Simpson paradox. A fascinating example, an extreme example of how the mean might be hiding something, can be used on that, or just sometimes we don't realize it. And what happens is basically, very simply, you can look at the numbers and try to understand better, just pause the video, but Very simply, what happens is that you have more women trying in finance, let's say, and the failure rate in finance is higher than the failure rate in economics, in political economy. So when you aggregate together, you don't take into account that women are doing something that's harder than men, where all of them have a larger risk of failing, and you put that together. So you compare, basically, you put together pears and apple. You cannot compare between the two faculties because, as we have seen, there are different failure rates. So it's a bit of a mess to do that. But again, this is a very extreme example to show how even the simplest concept, the mean or an average, could be misleading in statistics. And how can you unfold and discover this when you see statistics? Well, it's very hard. It's very hard because you have to know the underlying data and try to yourself to decompose the mean in different mean for different subcategories. If you don't have the numbers, it's impossible to do. But this might help if you see things that are contradictories, just to reconcile those things. And again, the Simpson paradox is something that's quite extreme. But back to the beginning, it's still already a problem to think that how the mean is simplifying everything. And when I debate with, for example, politicians or really policymakers, people that are working in conflict, but in the field, usually that's what I face. It's basically I have my average effect of weapons and war, and they know what happens in their situation, in their region where they were these conflicts. We need both level of abstraction. We need our level of abstraction, this big mean average to summarize the information. This is useful to drive policies on a large scale, and we need also the very specific expert knowledge of one simple dot in the data. Both are useful and both have limitations. So I hope this was useful. As usual, don't hesitate. If you have a question, just ask below, and also you can share other examples that we'll gladly discuss with you. That being said, thanks for watching and see you around.